Hello, Biz Catalyst 360 and Northern Lights Publishing welcome you to RoundTable 360 with your host and moderator, Joseph Carrabis. RoundTable 360 brings together people in the creative fields, dancers, thespians, poets, actors, musicians, authors, and others from across the globe in conversation about things that are relevant, irrelevant, serious, and fun. Today's session is Action Reaction. Creativity happens at the intersection of observation, imagination, and experience. And creatives navigate a world far different from non-creatives. Something ignored by 99% of the population is a precipice waiting for the creative 1% to jump off. Today's discussion is led by little old me, Joseph Carrabis. Today's guests include artist and outfitter Anne O'Brien, London-based fantasy and alternative history author Liz Tuckwell, and a host of others. Stay with us and enjoy. Hello and welcome to the June 2025 Roundtable, folks. Today's subject is Action Reaction. You'll notice I'm reading it. Creativity happens at the intersection of observation, imagination, and experience, paraphrasing Faulkner. And if you're going to paraphrase anybody, paraphrase Faulkner. Creatives navigate a world far different from non-creatives. Something ignored by 99% of the population is a precipice waiting for the creative 1% to explore. So today's questions for our panel are, what have been your action-reaction moments? Can you repeat them, and how? And do you seek them out? Why or why not? If nobody wants to raise a hand, I'll begin picking on people. Okay.
I think I'm unsure about the action reaction part. Or maybe it's just that I don't think that way about it. Can you be more specific about what you meant by that?
There is something which we might see or experience or taste. My example was La Rechearche de Temps Perdu. A scent, remembered from childhood, caused Proust to write an 8-volume book on the memory of the smell and the taste of madeleines from his childhood. Wagner's Ring Cycle was inspired by a hammer striking his thumb when he was putting up an outhouse. I'm kidding, folks. But the fact is, most people who are in creative disciplines, they may just sit down and create, but they'll have something in their mind that causes them to create. So there's an action and the creation. The creative act is a reaction. Just my way of phrasing it.
Okay, thank you for that. And as you were talking, I was thinking that what I might otherwise have referred to as simply inspiration is exactly what you just described. It is a reaction or a response to something. In my mind, those two things are different, but yeah, thank you. It helps.
My pleasure. Ken, please.
Yeah, I'm going to suggest maybe that we reverse it, that we have reaction and then action, because we're creatives and the emphasis should be on the action of creating. And I think that makes more sense out of it. Personally, something will happen in my life to which I have a reaction. And then that reaction leads to my action of creativity. The best example is the book that really, even though it was not the first one I wrote, it is the first one I wanted to write, which is called Memoirs from the Asylum. And it was triggered from my cousin committing suicide in one of the most grisly manners. He actually literally drove his motorcycle out in front of an 18-wheeler.
Oh,
And the reason I say it's suicide as opposed to everybody else in the family who call it a tragic accident was he'd done the same thing a year earlier at the same place, then recovered. And yet, everybody else. And here I am dealing with, my God, this is madness. This is suicide in the most grotesque. And everybody around me is saying, oh, no, no, tragic accident. And it was my reaction to that experience that led to my action of writing memoirs, which my wife insists is my best book. I don't know that I agree with her, but it is that is how I experience life. Is my reaction is to take the action of creating, whether it's a poem or a play or a novel or a short story. It's always the reaction first and then the action of creating.
Well, I appreciate that. I think there's a perhaps semantic difference, probably based on the fact that I've spent too many years as a physicist and mathematician. So I have to do reaction because that's the way God intended. But if reaction to action works better for you, go for it. Anyway, oh, I'm sorry. Rick, please.
Sure. At first, I wasn't so sure about action reaction as a direct motivation, but of course, Ken is right. Lots of things are reacting to something that happened to us. The classic examples are a lost love or a lost friend or an experience in war or in sports or whatever. So that's, of course, really, really critical. I think what makes creatives different is what I've always really felt very strongly. It's not that you want to write. I've known so many friends that I want to write a book about it. I want to write a book. I'm a police officer. I want to write a book about what I've done. Well, no, not that you want to do it. You have to do it. There's something missing unless you do it. You have to do it. You need to do it. You need to be a writer. And not that I'm all that successful, but for the novel that I wrote, which I wrote really over my life, it was being open to the muse, so to speak, sort of being open to being inspired. Examples were I'm trying to watch a football game and there's a commercial, and the commercial is Dodge trucks are ram tough, and it showed footage of wildlife, two mountain rams, butting heads, and I was like, wow, those rams are really, really impressive animals. And it just, my reaction to, so to speak, or my being open to the muse was, hey, my main character is going to exchange bitter words with a mountain ram on a mountain slope. I don't know what they're going to be yet, but I know it's going to happen. Another example, again, for the same novel, I'm at a park, at Stevens Creek Dam Park, with a friend barbecuing some hot dogs, and at the table look over to the grill, and there's these obnoxious blue jays picking at the hot dogs over a flaming grill. I thought birds would be afraid of fire, and I had no idea blue jays were so obnoxious. And I go, well, obnoxious blue jays have got to be in my novel. There's got to. On the same animal theme in the same novel, I'm in my parents' backyard studying for the bar examination. I look up and there's a hummingbird, about 3 feet from my face, just hovering there, just looking at me. And I go, yeah, this is what's going to happen in my novel. The main character is going to have a nice conversation this time with a hummingbird, but it will be important. So I guess those are reactions in one sense, but it's also sort of being open to the muse. And sometimes I'm more open, and sometimes I'm less. But especially if I'm working on a project, working on a piece, I try to be open to it, and then if I'm open, so things happen, and I see things, and I go, well, yeah, that should be in my story. So yeah, it is a reaction, you can say. It's also being open to the muse, and I agree with everybody who said this. I think it was Jack London. You don't wait for inspiration; you got to go out and find it. But also you have to be open to it. So sure, sometimes I'm writing, and then okay, I can think of more backstory for my main character. If I hadn't been trying to write, I wouldn't think of that backstory. But other times it's just living my life, just doing things, and just being open to being inspired. So those are my comments.
Very good, Rick. Thank you. Both Ken and Rick have essentially given us what have been your action-reaction moments, and I'm sure each of them has had quite a bit more. So I understand as an author, I understand how it works for authors. And if I may put you up on the pedestal here, you are in a different discipline from me. You're in a highly visual discipline. Yet, when I've heard you speak, for example, on the show that Mark hosts, and I apologize, Mark, I've done a 2K memory dump. I forgot the name. Feel free to shout it out.
Okay.
When I heard you speak, when I listened to you, it's obvious to me you're using visual metaphors, you're using visual language far more than I do, for example. So what are your reaction moments? Do you recognize them? Do you look at something and I have to paint that, I have to draw that, I have to recreate that on a canvas? Or is it some color combination that just suddenly flashes into your mind? How is that what does that do for you?
Well, Joseph, I want to say yes, yes, and yes.
Thank you for making it easy. Next person.
Oh, no. So my action and reaction, and like my two predecessors who say, they get inspiration messages from life. I think that one of the key things is walking around with for me anyway, walking around with my eyes wide open and my ears open, because so many times if you're preoccupied in something, you can certainly have a focus when an inspiration or an action is knocking at your door and you don't notice it. So I sometimes notice things that are unusual. And Mark will laugh at me. I was getting ready to retire, and I was focusing on the amount of light, believe it or not, in our bathroom, and I wanted to subdue it. So I had a broken nightlight, and I'm looking at it, and my mind went to some, as crazy as it seems, some paper mache that I made. And I said, wow, maybe I can turn that into a shade. So, my steps are a little more convoluted, where, I might look at something and it'll spark, maybe call it, to refer back to Mark, an inspiration or a reaction that if I look at something one way and then I look at it another way, I can see a different picture or a different use. But if I didn't look at all, I'd never see anything. That probably doesn't make a lot of sense to a lot of people, but I would imagine if I were to take that into a writer's scenario, like you say, with the blue jays or the hummingbirds, and they're talking at you, or the rams are making noise, if you just let your imagination soak that up, then, you know, the rams could get in an argument, or the birds could talk to one another, or you know, you find yourself maybe in a different place and time, and those birds have a different meaning. Maybe they turn into wallpaper, you know, and they're objects of colors and interest. But I think that we probably have reactions to actions much more than we give ourselves credit for, because I think that we walk around very inspired.
Thank you. One of the things you described was being able to physically create a panorama walking around something.
Yeah.
I know for myself, and I don't know if this is the same for other authors and writers and poets, Clarabelle, I can create a visual panorama in my head and turn whatever I'm looking at, so I can get all types of occultations of it as necessary. And I did appreciate you mentioning the hummingbird and the blue jays. When Rick was speaking, I was kind of locked onto man tough, and the visual image is two rams butting heads. Yeah, that's American marketing right there.
Right.
Ken. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, if I could elaborate to that, and we talk about emotions, now we looked at that as a visual, a picture. But let's say evoked some anger in you, or it inspired some beauty in you. Now you have that to take with you. So you say, like, if I paint and I'm really angry, something made me angry, I'm going to take that anger, and the reaction would be that that's going to come out in my work. I might not necessarily like it to come out in my work, but that's put me in an emotional state that I may inspire me or be my worst enemy. So, you know, sort of, I guess I'm agreeing with you, and then taking it one step further, that, you know, we can get emotional about things and in that action and react in a different way. And that comes out in our work.
I totally agree. Ken, do you have something for us?
Yeah, I really like what Ann's saying, but I want to introduce the notion of synesthesia, because I think the thing that makes us artists or creatives is that we take from one kind of situation, one kind of reaction, from my view, and we turn it into something else. It may be that we keep it fairly focused, that we then, because we saw this Ram commercial, we now have a scene in our book where some character is observing two rams fighting, but we also might turn it into something else. My wife is a visual artist, or she was, she's retired now, and she is very reactive to politics. And some of her best paintings were reactions to political situations. She did one of my favorites was a reaction to Chernobyl. And it was this incredible painting to me of the landscape had turned into a large deer, a stag, and the destruction was on top of this landscape. And I thought it was breathtaking. A few other people, including the person who bought it, obviously did too. But, you know, what I observed in her was Chernobyl, wait a minute, all of a sudden I'm seeing this deer. And I think, wow, that's fantastic. You know, I think that what we do as creatives is we take things that other people are seeing in one dimension of life, say the Ram Tough ad, and seeing it as about advertising, and we're taking it to some entirely new place. And I think that's what is the process of creativity is really, is taking stuff. I had a professor in college when he introduced his first lecture on European literature and thought, and he was giving it in a chemistry lab. Don't ask me why, but he reaches into the sink on this chemistry demo table, reaches down into the sink, pulls up nothing, but he says, "You see this? This is nothing. And this is what art is made from. It's when you take nothing and make something wonderful," which I thought was a pretty good analogy. And so I would say that, but he was wrong. It isn't nothing, it's different something. We take something different. And that's why Ira, whom I got to be a good friend of, was a wonderful professor, but not at all a creative. Because he never appreciated what the nothing was.
Thank you, Ken. Donna, please.
I'm agreeing. First of all, I don't think inspiration is something that we're waiting for. That's like waiting for Godot. I thought that I wanted to be a writer when I was 10, and ever since that time, everything that happened to me in my life that I saw, heard, felt, became material. And so that's what I think Ken is saying, that it's material, all of it. And it may just be inspire a way to describe something that you're trying to get across. But all that background is stored in there for us to use in our art. And I write the popular fiction, and the kinds of things that strike me are some crazy things that other people do, like a divorcing couple getting joint custody of a show dog, which said to me it's a really lousy divorce or a really valuable dog. And that was part of what I wanted to use. The rest was we got a puppy that was hard to train, and so I imagined that the trainer that Jen called couldn't do it because she was accused of killing her husband with her guard dog. There's how things work in my head.
Donna, thank you, because it's so good to know I'm not the only one who's screwed up, really. Yeah, everything that I'm hearing, yeah, I've been there, and I'm sure many of us have. Ken's comment about Jack London said, inspiration is where you find it. Stephen King has had a great line, which was, a lot of authors sit down and wait for inspiration. The rest of us just get to work. And I thought, yeah, I'm actually in that camp, with the caveat that a cup of coffee can inspire me. And I don't mean in the caffeine way. It's just I'll look down on the coffee and go, wow, those bubbles are forming fractal patterns. Okay, what if there's a spaceship based on, blah, blah, blah. Also remember that when I was in college, everybody thought I was perpetually 6 inches off the ground, stoned. And I went, no, this is just me normal. The thing about everything is inspiration. I'm kind of curious, how many of us here cannot stop being inspired? For me, it is a 24/7 thing. People say to me, how can you take that and turn it into a story? How can you not? Are you kidding? What am I looking? My sister has that great line. Did you and I grow up in the same house? How do you come up with these story ideas? I walk down the street. Anne, please.
Well, you inspired me to talk about something else, but I want to comment on Donna's, where she said a lot of her reactions are actually food, and maybe not being used right at the moment, but stored somewhere to be brought out later. So, my question was, and I'll cite an example with myself, how many of these actions get stored somewhere and then get pulled when, for most of you are writers, but if you're writing and you've got a situation, how do you respond to that situation in your writing? Is you go back to those actions, and probably subconsciously, and you go back to the refrigerator of your mind and you pull out some food or some fodder to mine happens to be, as I'm citing an example, my parents were brought up in the Depression, so they didn't waste anything. So I have a funny quirk about me that I don't like to waste things, and so I came up with a piece of art that is made out of thrown out paper. So that's probably a good example, even though I wasn't conscious this happened today and then 10 minutes later I'm doing something about it. But those actions were instilled in me where I might see something going to waste, or I kind of like antiques because, somebody made that and it has value. And how do I take that value and implement it either in another version or in its same version, or create something new out of it? So I think that's a response to action and reaction.
Thank you very much. Before I forget, and please do correct me, Mark, your show is The Anxious Voyage.
Yes, it is. You're right. Thank you.
I just want to point that out. It's a wonderful podcast, video cast for anyone who's seen it. The thing about everything going into the refrigerator or the vault, I prefer vault. I spend too much time at the refrigerator. But there's a story I heard, I do not know who originated it, about this author who was on the phone to their agent. Their agent was so apologetic. They hadn't done anything real for the author in several months. They're, talking what happened. The agent says, well, I had a death in the family. It was someone very close. And then the agent continues to talk and is getting highly emotional. And they're not hearing anything except kind of, scratching sound. And finally he says, what are you doing? The author says, I'm taking notes. This is good. I'm going to use this somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So, and again, look at all the authors smiling. Yeah. Ken, please.
Well, I don't know if since I'm so much older than many people, you guys might not all remember Milton Berle, the comedian, but he was famous or infamous for having a card catalog of every joke known, and he kept it up to date too. Supposedly he was always adding to it. But the thing that was really amazing about him was that he had an encyclopedic kind of memory. It was like he could go into that card catalog in his mind while you were saying something, and he'd come up with a joke about what you were saying from that catalog. Really extraordinary skill. What we're talking here now is our catalogs and how we keep them and how we organize them and how we access them, which makes us now, we're on the edge of AI. And can AI access those kinds of inspirational reactions better than we can? Or should we be using a computer to organize our creativity? Should we get up every morning and put our dreams, if we can remember them, into our computers, cross-reference, so that our individual AI can then, when we have a question about something we're writing later on, we could type in the appropriate search words and back from our storehouse. And this is a very interesting topic to me. is what's real, what's not real, how much of it's distorted, how do we access it, all of these wonderful things. And one of the things, Joseph, you mentioned your sister and you grew up in different homes. Okay. My brother and I did as well. And he has now, in his old age, he's a little older than I am, so I talk about his old age, not mine. But in his old age, he has now realized that my memory is more correct than his. But the bottom line is that we all of us grow up through our lives storing information in this silly computer we carry around, and then we access it. And the way we access it and the way we combine things is the programming that makes us unique and creative or not creative. And I don't know what to do with that except perhaps say to you, Joseph, because you're much more comfortable with sci-fi kind of writing, that I'd love to see a book about somebody who was living in sync with the computer. Maybe it already exists and I just haven't read it. But, where somebody and their computer are in sync, or maybe it's all of us. Maybe someplace there's actually this giant computer and we're all just in sync with it.
Thank you, Ken, because I don't have enough projects going.
I know you don't.
Just as a note, I believe that concept has been done more than once. I've seen many such shows on Netflix and Amazon. I don't know if any of them are done very well. If anyone ever saw the movie or read the book, The Terminal Man by Crichton, whoa, talk about a human-machine interface gone awry. That was probably the first one. Mark, please.
Thank you. If I looked distracted, it was because I was trying to find something, and I did. Ken, I'll find this if I can, after I make my comments, if I can put a file from my computer in the chat window, I will do it. Arthur C. Clarke wrote a story called The Ultimate Melody that was very much like what you were just talking about, being in sync with one's computer. Anyway, while people were talking, and this was actually a response to things everyone has been saying so far, excuse me, I wrote the phrase expressive interpretation. And I wonder if that's what we all do. And so then the next thing that occurred to me is the creativity in that, in the interpretation? Or is it in whatever our drive or desire is to express that? What elements of that qualify us as creative? And I'll just throw this in here for the sake of throwing it in here. When I was in college, I actually misspent an entire semester on one book called Word and Object by Willard Van Orman Quine, who tried to apply the principles of mathematical logic to language. In my estimation, he failed miserably because I don't think language is necessarily, and especially when it comes to interpretation or translation, necessarily logical in the same way that mathematics is logical. Anyway, my biggest frustration in that course is that he didn't call me before he wrote the book, because I would have told him not to bother.
Thank you, Mark. I would offer a book to you, but I have a basic rule about self-plugging. here on the show. So,
Well, I'm sorry, but the flip side of that is I'm always open to having my mind changed. So if this book will change my mind, please, what is it?
a mathematical exploration of language, the Book of the Wounded Healers, by
That
some
would,
little-known author.
is that the name of it? The Book of the Wounded
Book of
Healers?
the Wounded Healers.
Thank you.
Uh, and I'll also offer to you that there used to be a discipline called mathematical linguistics prior to there being computational linguistics.
Hmm.
The shift was from actual mathematical notation or structure, because most people wouldn't recognize it as mathematics, to computational inside a computer, which has led to AI language synthesis. Clara, we have not heard from you, and I want you to have a moment in the sun. And then I'm going to harass Liz because we have not heard from her.
Yes, thank you. So I've been listening and just kind of digesting and nodding along to a lot of the things that I've been hearing today. I wanted to especially mention that I really resonated with something you said, Joseph, about how can you not when it comes to having that creative reaction in your head. And Anne, when you mentioned being open, having your mind open so that you can have that inspiration or those reactions come in. I think I really resonate with those two statements because that is very reflective of my own experience as a creative. I've often found that it feels like those moments of reaction happen when I am the most mindful and I'm the most receptive to experiencing my surroundings. So that could be being out in nature, that could be on a busy street and just taking the time to notice those small things, those little pebbles, those little sparks, an image of something in passing that sticks. And I don't know why some of them stick, but they do. And they stay there. And sometimes they can stay there for years. I had a professor once who's some of the best advice he gave me was sometimes you need rumination time. Sometimes ideas need to mature and they need to boil slowly. They need to simmer. So sometimes I'll find that I'll have had maybe an image in my head, a line of dialogue, even maybe just a couple loose words that have been somewhere in some corner of my brain for a decade, if not longer. And then I'll have finally reached a point in my life where I'm able to synthesize them together. And it's the time. It's like, oh, I know how these pieces fit. Maybe I needed to collect a few more pieces before I could write that poem or write that short story. I notice it seems like a lot of that, also of that piecing together, happens not in my conscious mind, but more in something that's farther back. I think away from the judgment, that critical, the prefrontal cortex, super judgmental, super logical, super rational. That's not where, at least that creative action and reaction happens for me. It's once those things have had time to process in that safer subconscious space.
Thank you, Clarabelle. Have you ever actually seen the prefrontal cortex working? It has two basic modes. First mode is like that, and the second mode is you mentioned something Anne said about the mind being open. I remember working with a brilliant Hungarian mathematician, Erdős. And when he was ready to take on a new problem, he would say, "My mind is open." And that basically said, quick, whoever has a problem they can't solve, give it to him now, right now. Brilliant, brilliant man. Liz, you haven't said
Hello.
anything yet.
No, I haven't. I was just thinking again what people say, and one of the things about the refrigerator, and I was actually reflecting for me, I think I actually tend to react quite quickly just something, a couple of incidents that sparked me to write a story, and I haven't stored them a long time. And I think it's partly because I was annoyed and irritated, and in some ways I wanted to get my revenge by writing a story. So I was writing it while I was still in that frame of mind, rather than allowing it to mature for a long time. For example, I was on a cruise with my sister-in-law and mother-in-law, and there was a Canadian guy on the ship who was heavily pursuing my sister-in-law, which I thought was quite amusing. And he really was not taking no for an answer, which possibly because we were British, she must have been being a little too polite about it. But it made me think about how on a cruise ship, it's a perfect opportunity to present yourself how you want to be presented, because people can't really check up on who you are or really get much information about you, so you can become a completely different thing. So my led me to thinking, so if you're a serial killer on a cruise ship, how would you be targeting someone? How would you? So it led on from that. I think part of it was also a slightly irritated my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, which led to the twist in the story because it was a horror story. So I think that's just my reaction to it. Is I think sometimes when you get the spark can be like actually an irritation. I'm not saying it produced a pearl, but it can be something like that, as a grit thing that actually affects you.
Thank you. At some point, I'll share the story about the guy driving down the road, picks up a hitchhiker 20 minutes in. Hitchhiker says, "Aren't you worried that I might be a serial killer?" And the driver says, "No, the odds about 2 serial killers in the same car is way too high." Ken, please.
Okay. Yeah. We've been talking about the creative process, but I want to make sure we give some time to the editing process, the removing process, which is also part of it. I think one of the things in my storehouse, if you will, like when I'm going through and I'm creating and I'm drawing on all of these experiences and past reactions and looking through that card file in my brain and all, is that I realize that often I've gotten too much out there. It's kind of like when you're doing mise en place for cooking, since we've been using a refrigerator a lot here, and you're just taking things out of the refrigerator, and then you realize, and spices, and then you realize, gosh, do I really need this? And one of the things that strikes me about the creative process is going back, that that piece we're working on becomes its own reality. And that we're constantly going, at least I am, constantly going back through that reality, experiencing it, changing it, decide, wait a minute, this piece doesn't belong, or maybe this piece needs to be someplace else. Just recently, I've been working on a play, and we got hung up. My co-author and I got hung up. We were in the second act, and wait a minute, how do we go forward? How do we go forward? And all of a sudden, I realized that I had revealed something in the first act that really, by revealing it, I screwed up the second act. And so I had to remove it and now move it into the second act. And that kind of constant re-examining of that world and reacting to it is part of the creative process. So, for example, if you're painting, you may want to say, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't have made that color, which is why we find paintings often overpainted. I know my wife would go in and change things and overpaint a painting all the time. I'm watching a lot of ballet recently. I managed to subscribe to the British Opera and Ballet on library. I had a great deal on it, and I've been watching the ballet and watching the whole process of a ballet and thinking about, wait a minute, they did that there. No, but now they've done it there, and why, and what does that mean? And that integrate, and I've kind of been applying it to my writing too. That there's that editing and repetitive, and how do we create a trope, and why do we create a trope, and what is that symbolism? And I find myself growing as a writer by contemplating ballet, which is kind of a cool thing to contemplate, especially when you're getting arthritic and you can't jump around as much. You can at least do it vicariously. But I think that process of looking at our work as its own world and going through that process of experiencing it and re-experiencing it and re-experiencing it and toning it and editing it is such a beautiful part of the creative process for me.
Editing is its own creative exercise, I'll grant you that. Rick, please.
Sure. Well, what Ken was saying really sort of strikes home for me. Editing, organizing, putting things in the right order. I had more rejections than I could possibly count for actually very few short stories. There's tons of rejections. And the stories that I sold was when I realized, well, wait a minute, this should be over there, or this scene should be moved, or this scene's not here, it should be in the middle. There should be a middle part. Even in conversation, the first short story I sold, which was last year in September, I thought it was really good, but everyone was rejecting it. And then I finally read it in a hard copy rather than on my computer. And there was too long dispositive conversations, or actually just dialogue by one character. And I thought, well, wait a minute. He's saying things out of order. If I reorder what he's saying, it will be so much better. And then another part is like, he doesn't have to say everything, it's expository. So I have to tell the reader all these things, and it has to come out of his mouth, because if you do, a third person omnipotent, everybody hates that. You got to be, third person limited. But I thought, well, wait a minute, just go into the word balloon of the main character who's being talked to make a certain important point to tell the reader, and it works so much better. So yeah, that is reaction also when we're talking about action reaction. So it's really part of our editing. I'd also say that what Clarabelle was talking about was actually what I was inarticulately trying to say when I was first talking, that you always have to be open, otherwise you're not going to ever get inspired. And I guess my last thing is that interpretation, that is what writers, creatives, artists do, but interpretation is what makes it art. That's what makes it art, in my opinion. Otherwise, it's just regurgitating the same thing. I didn't have my character look at two rams fighting. I was just inspired by the rams to realize one ram would exchange bitter words with him. And it really, I think really the bottom line for creatives, interpretation, is the art.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Rick. And just so you'll know, I'm writing that down as some discussion you'll be leading down the road for us. Donna, yes.
Yes. You fellas are all talking about the craft that has to do with our art, which is something that I think you can learn and grow from experience doing it. What others have made me think about is how I use my memory of all this stuff that's in the refrigerator. I realize that to plot something, it's very deliberate. I select something that looks, like it has possibilities to make a plot. But when I start writing And what I'm doing then is just trying to get my thoughts down accurately. And that's when I draw on my comparisons to something like, as I said, inspiration sounds to me like waiting for Godot. That's the kind of comparison that I might use in a book. So yeah, we do have to learn our crafts, and we have to use our tools, however are appropriate for what we're doing.
I agree, and I want to offer something. I think Ken touched on it. Something that I do very much. Ken talked about learning how to craft better by watching ballet. I regularly study different media because I do learn from them. And for example, and I'm going to ask Anne to either tell me I'm completely off base here, whacked out, whatever, or just go, yes, Joseph, you've nailed it. Thank you. I'll say that for you. In my mind, and often when I'm composing, when I'm plotting something out, plotting and writing to me is the logical order of things that must happen for the final outcome of the novel or story to occur. These things must occur for this to occur, and for the reader to appreciate that they must occur. In my mind, when a painter, a visual artist, is crafting a piece, in my mind, they say, and I'm not going to say this well, but this is how it goes. The sun must be over here, and then I need a tree over here and over here. And to me, that is a visual plotting. To create the overall effect, which we would do in a novel or a story, a visual artist must create a visual system that tells the story, for lack of a better expression, or creates a story in the viewer's mind. But every piece has a purpose. And I'm not sure if it was Ken, but someone was saying about, or painting over, things get painted over a number of times. Yeah, and to me, that is the editing process on a canvas to make sure the plot, for lack of a better term, of the painting, of the visual image, is structured so that the viewer has the experience the visual artist wishes to create. Does that make any sense to anybody, or am I once again talking Gaelic and people are like, did a lot of drugs in the 60s, didn't you, Joseph?
Well, it does make sense to me. I know you wanted me to talk about that. And yes, I do believe taking and using different, I'll call them mediums. In other words, I look at words as part of a painting. In other words, you're putting together words. I sometimes ballet, they're putting together steps, and those steps tell the story. Gardening to me is three-dimensional art. I'm working with live items, live plants to tell a story. And yes, it does have to have logic, but in your writing, I think that we show, and even in pictures, in other words, there's that emotional piece that comes out, that there's that abstract way where, I don't want to get too crazy, but our life, if we all walk down the same street, as Clarabelle said, her little pebbles, Joseph, your pebbles would be different, my pebbles would be different, Ken's, Mark's, et cetera, and all those are based on the way our brain has been structured. Our computer has been structured to be observant, so there's certain things we like and don't like. So bringing that back to taking a different medium, whether it be ballet or something else, and having that abstract analogy help you to sort out and to strengthen your muscles into doing your craft in the medium of your choice, I think is a very safe way because we're all self-critical. I see it as a safety mechanism. So we can look at the ballet and say, oh yeah, they did this or they did that and they didn't do this. And then it's a little way to get away from our own piece. And then when we come back, we have a little more muscle to be able to do the editing. And again, editing is the action and the reaction is what we do about it. We're able to take away certain pieces or put it in the story where it makes sense. Or, you know, if I'm trying to tell a story with a picture and I don't want to paint a happy picture, I want to paint a deep, moody picture, I might put the sun somewhere else. But that's the story I want to tell. Did I answer your question?
I believe you did.
Okay.
You know, the befuddled look on everyone else's faces. Well, that's the Ken. You had something for us.
Yeah, interesting how much Anna and I tend to agree. Really, like I think that maybe we need a different word than plot and story. Okay, and I think the word I want to use is composition. And I'm using that word because I think it's more inclusive. And the other day, as I'm sure anybody who's on LinkedIn, you're constantly being bombarded with people. Can I help you sell your book? Huh? How many of those do we get a day? You know, and they're all. And the first question they ask is, "Who is your reader?" So I have found my best answer to that is my reader is somebody who wants to read aloud so they can listen to the words. And they always think I'm fooling. So they think, oh, you're putting me on. I'm not going to talk to you anymore. I'm waiting to find the person who actually says, oh my God, I've never heard anybody say that before, but that's interesting. But to me, even though my accent is very New Englandy, it's the sound of words, and it is the rhythm and sound as much as their meanings. When my wife paints, she often uses words in the paintings themselves. And they make sense because not only are they put in a way that makes sense and in a color that makes sense, but they add to the composition. The thing I've been watching on the British ballet lately is a thing about Virginia Woolf, in which you have the words first, and then you have the dance, and then of course you have the original music. So it's really, I mean, it's not just dance. It shouldn't just be dance. And, you know, my thing is that I find it wonderful that we are able to synthesize things and bring things together that way. And I just I wish that in our educational system, we were encouraging people to do that, you know? And starting with in first grade, oh no, don't read aloud, read to yourself. Oh my God, no, no. The whole point of speech, the whole point of language is that other people can hear you. You know? And I think that far and away too often, what we're doing is trying to dampen down the enthusiasm, not just for color and sound, I mean, for everything. That the arts are enthusiastic, even when we're sad, even when we're depressed. We glory in our sadness. we glory in what the creation is. And I think that that's such a wonderful thing. And that's it.
Thank you very much. Mark, I'm going to address you in a second. Donna, you mentioned something about craft, and that's something which people can be taught, they can learn. Have you ever thought of developing your craft as the art of sharing your imagination with someone else? And I'll let you ruminate on that. I want to get to Mark. Please, Mark.
Donna, if you're ready to respond to Joseph's question, please go ahead.
I guess that's what I do all the time. And I'm responding to Ken as well. I write in first person present tense. So I hear my dialogue, I hear every word of my book all the time, hoping that people will hear it too. Interesting.
Mark, please.
I find myself making a lot of notes today. While you were talking, Joseph, you said something about refining things so that the person who's perceiving whatever it is, whether it's Anne's painting or your writing, has the experience that you want them to. But that actually brought to mind Rick's point about interpretation. And then I started to think about it. No, I think I want to say my thinking about that started to solidify when Ken mentioned synthesis. So I don't know how possible it is to predetermine an experience of our work for another person. And I'm going to give you an example that may or may not make sense. Anne and I have a friend. In fact, he came over for dinner with us 2 nights ago. I've known, his name is Kevin. I've known Kevin for more than 30 years. I know that. And he's a writer. And I may have mentioned this actually. If you go on IMDb, Kevin wrote and co-directed a film about Wilhelm Reich. It's called Love, Work, and Knowledge. And we're trying to find a way to get it streamed again. At any rate, he told us that he was working on a play about Ulysses S. Grant. And for a lot of reasons, he'd sort of let it go for a while, and I was trying to encourage him. He emailed Act 1, Scene 1 to us yesterday morning, I think. I really don't think he intended me to have the experience that I had. The experience that I had was much more emotional than I imagined it would be. And the play takes place at the point in Grant's life when he's writing his memoir. And at that point, he's dying of cancer. He has throat cancer. And there are 19 pages that Kevin sent. And on page 17, Grant is talking to a man he's hired to come transcribe what he's saying. And as Grant is talking, and as Kevin describes it, he actually gets up out of his chair. He's recalling aloud more detailed recollections from the Battle of Shiloh than he had put in his first draft. And I ended up being as taken with what Grant was doing as Grant was with what he was saying. And Kevin described that as Grant got up from his chair, and at that point he was walking with a cane, the lights on the stage started to come down except for a spotlight that stayed on Grant. And as Grant was walking, he actually walked to the front of the stage and was essentially reciting these recollections from the Battle of Shiloh to people in the audience. That started on page 17. When I got to the end of page 19, I realized I hadn't breathed or blinked. And I was so much more taken and so emotionally affected by that. I have yet to talk to Kevin about it, but I highly doubt that's what he thought I would do. So I just, again, given what you said, Joseph, and what Rick said and what Ken said, I don't know if we can make the effort, but I don't know if the experience is the creators to determine.
Mark, thank you. I think that's yet another discussion topic which you'll be leading at some point.
Yeah, I was actually thinking also about the one you and I have already discussed about talent and how do you know if you have it? And if you do, and it can be legitimized to you somehow, what do you do with it? And what are you bound to do with it? And Ann and I had a discussion last night about what do I do with Kevin? Because Kevin he's brilliant, but he doesn't know it or believe it. And I don't know if he's going to finish that play.
We'll talk. Ken, please.
Well, first of all, I'm going to respond to you, Mark, and say, for God's sake, tell Kevin how wonderful that scene is.
Oh, I wrote to him as soon as I finished it. I wrote to him.
And that's what we do for one another as artists, is we encourage. I think that if we as artists can determine the reaction of our reader, viewer, listener, whatever, and know and can predict it and can make it, take it under our control, I'm not sure whether that is the sign of the best artist or the worst artist. But, for the vast majority of us, I don't think that's what we're going to do anyway. What we're going to do, what we're trying to do, and I'm not talking about like cozy mysteries where everything gets kind of resolved at the end. And even then, I'm not talking about that necessarily. But I'm talking about when the end comes and the person is looking or listening, that moment, that consumer has a moment, hopefully, of epiphany, awareness. Years ago, I was walking through the New York Met Modern Art Museum, and Picasso's Guernica was hung over a staircase, so you could get back from it. And I just suddenly, it was the first time I had seen this painting. And I just stood there transfixed. And I stood there for quite some time, just staring. And then I moved on, changed. I would never, ever be the same person again. Now, I do not know. I mean, I know what the subject matter was, and I know what Picasso's point of view about the Spanish War was, but all I know is that I have never been able to look at painting the same way. I have never looked at color and movement of color the same way. And I have certainly never looked at art the same way of any form. It was a moment that changed me. When I write, I'm hoping that I will get some small amount of that kind of from my audience. Beyond that, I cannot tell them what that will be for them. I think that is what art exists for, is for that moment. And when we celebrate the arts, that's what we're looking for. And have I had maybe a couple dozen, maybe more than a couple dozen experiences like that. And they're really amazing. All of a sudden, it could be watching a play. Pirandello's Tonight We Improvise. Lorca's Yama. you know, Brex, Mother Courage, you know, Guernica, you know, they're just Mahler, almost anything he wrote. And these moments just change me. And I'm hoping that that's what I'm doing for my audience. And maybe that's a topic we could talk about. How do we want our audience to walk away from our art? Or carry it with them, perhaps, more than walk away.
Thank you, Ken. Rick.
Sure. I really have to completely agree with Mark and Ken. True art, or maybe that's too arrogant to say, better art is where the audience, the reader, has their own interpretation of what you did. I truly think the writer, the artist, creates, his interpretation is the creation, is the art, but that's the first interpretation. The second interpretation is the reader. And I think the better the art is, the more variation readers are going to have, or the audience is going to have. I think that's what's made the great art. Proust, Wagner, Tolkien. Everybody has. People have different reactions. One thing that struck me when I read something by Tolkien is that he said that he found it interesting that people who said the best part of Lord of the Rings was this, and that other people said that was the worst thing that they thought. And he sort of threw up his hands and goes, well, what can you do? The only thing he agreed with is that the trilogy should have been longer, which I agree with also. But I think that's what makes the greater the art is, the more interpretations the reader is going to have. And I've had a few readers read my manuscript, and I was surprised when some people said they really like this. The first person who ever read it, he's dead now, Barry Levin, who had a antiquarian bookstore in Los Angeles specializing in fantasy and science fiction. There's one scene that he just loved, which surprised me, but I was happy. It was about squirrels. So you can see there's a lot of talking animals, at least in the first part of my novel. But anyway, those are my comments.
Thank you, Rick. Donna, please.
Yes. I don't think we can really predict the reaction of our audience. I think that all we can do is get it right for ourselves. And I think that's what Mark Spren did, got it right for himself. And that's when I think our work is most successful, when we've completely expressed ourselves the way we want to.
Go ahead, Mark.
I just, if I could, Don, obviously you don't know what I'm about to tell you, but this also ties into what Ken and Joseph were saying about editing. When Kevin was working on the documentary film about Wilhelm Reich, I'm just going to abbreviate this. In 2015, he was diagnosed with primary progressive MS. So it's compromised his energy and etc. So he told us while he was here that he packed up the manuscript for the play as he had written it to one particular point, and all of the books that he had collected about Grant, and asked his brother to take them down to the basement in Kevin's home. And then he said he couldn't help himself. He made his way to the basement somehow and pulled out the manuscript after some months. And he started to edit it. And he said, out of Act 1, Scene 1, he probably removed at least 10% of it. He actually mentioned the number of pages that he took out. So he was very, very deliberate about that. Um, but anyway, if there was another point, I'm sorry I lost it, but I was responding to what you said about Kevin's intent to make it as good as he could, and that intent is still clearly there. I hope with my prompting, and thank you for that reminder, Ken. And I don't know, maybe some other tools he can get. I hope he can finish it and not be prohibited from finishing it by his MS.
We hope. I want to put something into the conversation, which my guess is, gauging audience possible reaction. Might sound like I'm disagreeing, but actually I'm very much agreeing. I believe all of us who are creative create first for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Even people who are say they're purely market driven. I don't know anybody who's purely market driven. Well, let me take that back. I do know a few people who are purely market driven who admit, yeah, that was a piece of crap that I put out there, but I knew it was going to sell. Okay, fine. But I want to go back to, we create for ourselves. If it's not something we're satisfied with, well, whatever. But being able to predict or gauge or determine or compose to create a certain audience reaction. I'll speak for myself. I very much craft for specific reactions at specific points in my work. And if I don't hear a laugh, somebody's reading my work, if I don't hear the laugh where I know there's a laugh, I failed. I got to work that part. If I don't see tears or hear sniffling, I know there's a problem with the work. The thing is, it's a social mechanics issue. It's what comes down to what's called economy of population. It's the same thing that allows certain social systems to work in other countries which would never work in the United States, and vice versa. You have, let me know if I'm boring you folks. You have a given cultural system in a given society, and there is going to be a similarity of experience throughout that culture, which you can craft stuff to. The most obvious example of that is in TV, radio, any kind of performance art, where if they don't get the audience response, they know there's a problem with the play, with the script, with the production values, somehow, something or other. So while I do agree completely that I'm the first person I have to please with my work, I also craft intentionally to create emotional responses where I want them to be, because I know that will keep people engaged in what I've written, in my case, in what I've written or what I've crafted. I think that's extremely important to do. I could be a one-off. I've been called that before. I'm gonna let Mark go first, Ken.
No, I don't need to go first. Ken, go ahead.
Okay, fine. Ignore me.
Thank you anyway.
Thank you, Mark. Two things. One is that I think you have raised another great topic for us to talk about at some point, Joe, which is how do we engage our audience and keep them engaged? What is engage? That's a whole topic in itself, and I think a great one. And it's different from conclusion. Like, for example, okay, we want them laughing and getting angry and what have you, but at the end, what they take away as the whole is what they're doing. And I think you've raised a very interesting point, but I actually raised my hand because I wanted to respond to Mark or ask Mark a question, a loaded question, Mark, are you going to do what Kevin has asked you to do?
Kevin hasn't
Oh,
hasn't
yes, he
asked
did.
me to do anything.
Yes, he did. And
Okay.
that's what just dawned on me. You know, he sent you this absolutely marvelous scene in which Grant, who is dying and is disabled, is dictating to his amanuensis. What a nice word that is. I love that word. And he sent that to you, I think, because he wanted an answer from you. Will you be his amanuensis, or can you find him one?
Oh, wow.
It struck me as being such a powerful and beautiful question. It speaks, I have to say, it speaks to my heart that he would ask that way. And I have to say that it is probably one of the greatest compliments you will ever receive in your life, from my perspective.
The first thing I have to say is thank you for pointing that out to me. I'm not sure I would have seen it that way. I do now. I had to help him out to his car. And as he was getting in his car, I said, I hope you understand I'm going to be an absolute pain in your ass. And he said, I know. And I said, so if you don't want me to be a pain in your ass, you're going to have to tell me. So I could have seen what you just pointed out, Ken, but I didn't. And you actually said, in response to what Joseph said, exactly what I was going to say, which is that, yes, I think we put things in our work pointedly to evoke particular reactions, whether they're humorous ones or sad ones or whatever. But again, I absolutely agree with Ken's last point. I don't think that shapes the interpretation of the whole. Yeah, we should be bummed if we don't get the reactions we intended in particular points. But to echo what Rick said again, I don't think we're driving when it comes to what anybody's takeaway from a finished piece of work is. So I may have seemed to disagree with you on that one, Joseph, but I don't.
Oh, no, I don't think you disagreed. I think we're using different terms. You said takeaway. I'm thinking about response. As somebody is reading something, I want to have a very specific response to their reading it.
Yeah.
When they put in my case, the book or story down and they're walking away, if they're still churning about it, that's a big plus. I've really done my job. But do I personally write for a specific takeaway? That's a bonus. My job is to entertain. If I can, if I can educate as I'm entertaining, wow. That's Isaac Bashevis Singer. That was his great teaching to me anyway, was, do you write to educate? No, I write to entertain. If I can't entertain them, I can't teach them anything. You think back, I think back to my favorite professors, my favorite mentors and teachers. They were the ones who had fun, who made fun, who, enjoyed what they were talking about in the classroom. Not the ones who are, and then when we do the rise over the run of the preconfabulated histrionic. Anyway, we're coming up on time, folks. Ken, you have one more thing, and then we're going to wrap it up.
Yeah, I want to just point out that when we talk about entertaining, it's like puns. Some people might laugh and some people might groan. The one thing we don't want them doing is saying, you didn't have to tell me it was a pun. As long as they're reacting, then we are entertaining. If we are telling them what to experience, then we're not entertaining, we're boring.
Yes, I totally agree. I'm going to call on the quiet ones to say something before we close. Liz, do you have anything you'd like to add? I know I'm putting you on the spot.
But I have to admit, ever since Rick said the thing about how readers experience, I've been searching frantically for a book I've got somewhere, which is a science fiction book set in the far future, but it's actually written in slightly different English. If you try to read it, it's almost gobbledygook. But if you actually read it out loud, it then makes sense. So it's a book that you have to read out loud for it to make sense to you. And unfortunately, I've been frantically looking on the internet, and I cannot find the novel. It's there somewhere. And it's somewhere on my bookcase, but I'm not sure where. But it's just thing I was thinking about is just you were saying about how readers experience novels. I think that is a really classic way that the writer was deliberately making the reader experience a book in a different way they wouldn't do it. And actually, when you hear the language, it makes more sense of the society that the book is set in as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Clara?
Yes. I love that. I love that lead in. That was beautiful. Just as a closing thought, I'm going to do the typical groan of this is more of a comment than a question. But I really enjoyed listening to this conversation. Even if I've been quiet, I really loved hearing from everyone and seeing how, despite how different we all might be as creatives, there is still so much of a shared mindset, I think, in that we are looking for those sparks, even if those are sparked by different things.
Mm-hmm.
I love seeing that there are those of us who understand what it's like to have those things catch our attention, and that we can come together and we can talk about it, and we can share that we are all open to something that maybe not everybody is.
True.
Elegantly said from the award-winning poet, Clarabelle Moray-Fields. Thank you all. As Clarabelle said, this has been a very enlightening and entertaining discussion. I'm not going to tell anybody how they should respond to it. Don't want to get Ken upset. But I think this has been great. Thank you all. Thank you for watching RoundTable 360, where creatives from diverse fields and across the globe gather to discuss what's relevant, irrelevant, serious, and fun. RoundTable 360 is brought to you by Biz Catalyst 360 and Northern Lights Publishing. Our shows are taped the last Thursday of every month at 7:30 a.m. Hawaiian time, 10:30 a.m. Pacific time, 1:30 p.m. Eastern time, 6:30 p.m. London time, 19 hours 30 minutes Central European Standard Time, and whatever time that converts to, wherever you are. Please join us at http://nlb.pub/roundtable. That address is on your screen. See you next time, and until then, stay well and safe.